Good morning, good afternoon, good day to all the participants, excellencies, dear colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us today. As we celebrate the United Nations World Sustainable Transport Day, I warmly welcome you and thank you for joining this multi-stakeholder webinar on the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport 2026-2035, organized by UNDESA. My name is Nayara Costa. I'm the Senior Sustainable Development Officer of the Outreach and Partnerships Branch in the Division for Sustainable Development Goals at UNDESA. Before we start, please allow me to make a few housekeeping announcements. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. The recording, presentation slides, and all the relevant information will be made available on the event's website and will be shared with all the registered participants. We would be grateful if all the speakers could keep their cameras on when they are speaking, and we kindly ask all speakers to mute their microphones when you are not speaking. For all the participants, please use the Q&A box if you have questions or if you want to share comments, suggestions, and ideas. And please, when you do so, indicate your name, the organization, the country that you are coming from. Let me just make a quick overview of today's agenda with you. We'll start with some opening remarks, followed by a recorded message from the United Nations Special Envoy on Road Safety. Next, there will be an update on the President of the UN General Assembly's high-level meeting on sustainable transport, followed by a brief overview of the process that is being set up for the upcoming UN Decade of Sustainable Transport. We will then move to a multi-stakeholder panel discussion with distinguished panelists from various sectors focusing on stakeholder inputs to the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport. And this will be followed by a round of questions and answers. As I mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A toolbox. As you can see, we have a very full agenda today. So without further ado, let me hand over the floor to my colleague, Ms. Astra Bonini. She's the Chief of the Integrated Policy Analysis Branch at the Division of Sustainable Development Goals at DESA. She will be delivering some opening remarks and managing this part of the call. Astra, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nayara. Dear colleagues, distinguished participants, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's really a pleasure to welcome you to this global webinar on the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport. And I'm especially pleased that Deputy Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Europe, Mr. Dimitri Mariasin, is here to speak in the opening, also on behalf of all of the regional commissions. DESA is closely collaborating with all of the regions to prepare for the decade. Today is especially timely for this webinar because the 26th of November marks the second World Sustainable Transport Day. And we are, of course, very excited to be celebrating the day with you, discussing issues surrounding sustainable transport. I really don't think I need to convince anyone who's here of the importance of sustainable transport to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The fact that we have so many participants coming from different fields of expertise and different vantage points really shows how committed we are to ensuring that transport action contributes to making our world and our communities more sustainable. Sustainable transport, of course, has been a crucial part of the UN's work for a long time, but this is an especially important time because two General Assembly resolutions were adopted last year that have really energized the work here at the United Nations headquarters on sustainable transport. Be it by declaring the 26th of November as the World Sustainable Transport Day, or by setting the first UN Decade of Sustainable Transport, which will start in 2026. Transport is really front and center in our discussions of sustainable development now at UN headquarters. Today, we will focus on the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport and in particular, its implementation plan. This is a plan that member states requested our Department of Economic and Social Affairs to develop in collaboration with the UN regional commissions and in consultation with the member states, UN entities, and other intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, and all other stakeholders. We'll provide a short presentation on the details of the process toward the plan a little bit later, But now I really look forward to hearing from our key partners who will set the stage for an engaging discussion to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Astra, for leading, for your introduction and for leading this process at UNDESA. Let me now give the floor to Mr. Dimitri Mariasin. He's the Deputy Executive Secretary of UNESE, and to learn more about the impactful work that UNECE is doing on sustainable transport. Mr. Mariasin, you have the floor, and thank you so very much for joining us. I know you are on a mission. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of all regional commissions. And first of all, a happy Sustainable Transport Day. We are delighted to join UNDESA in this very important undertaking to have a clear implementation plan for the decade that was agreed in the GA. We, as regional commissions, are going to make sure that three things happen. First, that we bring the best possible combination of our expertise and policy and normative role to the table. Second, that we undertake effective stakeholder consultations with member states. The regional consultations have already started. And third, that we, together with UNDESA, ensure the inclusive process. So the broad partnerships that we have in our regions and beyond should be brought to bear in as we design the implementation plan for the Sustainable Transport Decade. It's going to be very important that when we talk sustainability, we mean all three pillars of sustainability. Sustainable transport has to make sense economically. It has to be inclusive. It has to tackle such very difficult to tackle issues as road safety, among others. And it has to contribute to decarbonizing the economy, as transport plays a very big role in carbon emissions. From all regional commissions, there are specific entry points we see in this regard. Let me just mention a few key points. UN-ESCAP has already held its consultation for the decade, and the committee of ESCAP that deals with transport initiated a very inclusive consultative process that will look at various aspects, including connectivity in the Asia-Pacific region. At ECA, there will be special focus on strengthening of efficient regional transport markets, and an interesting nexus issue between developing transportation and improving inclusive regional value chains of critical minerals. There's one example where transport plays an enabler role for a much broader transition that we need to undertake. UNESCO is also confirming its commitment to regional connectivity and working on cross-border transport connectivity, including making sure that sustainable transport is part of a broad-based solutions for the region to prosper. And ECLAC is prioritizing multimodal transport systems. Developing multimodal transport systems such as rail, ferries, and airships will be a priority, including with reducing environmental impact. If I may just say a couple of words about UNECE. UNECE is a bit of special when it comes to transport because we happen to host most of UN's regulations on land transport. What ICAO does for air and IMO does for maritime, we do for rail, road, and inland waterways. And we will make sure that we bring the full palette of instruments we have, be it normative or policy instruments, and the Inland Transport Committee of UNECE to the table when developing the implementation plan of the decade. And of course, one of the most important developments recently is the adoption by the Inland Transport Committee of the strategy on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the land transport decarbonization strategy, which outlines an ambitious vision going forward of how to decarbonize road, rail, intermodal transport. And we have already launched dialogue with ICAO and IMO how to do this for three modes of transport together at COP29 in Baku. And we hope this movement of decarbonizing transport and scale, while remembering that it has to be resilient to climate change, it has to be safe, and it has to be economically viable, will be taken up during the decade and will lead to specific results on the ground, which, by the way, and that's my final point, we as regional commissions, together with UNDESA and all the partners, will eventually need to bring to to the UN country teams and make sure that UN resident coordinators are empowered to speak on behalf of the UN system on the ground in developing countries, promoting the values, the principles, and the specific objectives of the decade. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mariassin, for joining us today and for the work that UNECE and the UN regional commissions are doing is really critical for the promotion of sustainable transport. And we are sure you will have an amazing and important role in the upcoming UN decade of sustainable transport. Let's now move forward, and we have a video message by the UN Special Envoy on Road Safety, Mr. Jian Tot. Over to my colleagues to present the video. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the Secretary General Special Envoy for Road Safety, I wanted to address to you all in order to celebrate the second World Transport Day and to highlight the importance of the upcoming UN Decade of Sustainable Transportation. Since the launch of our first decade of action for road safety in 2011, we have made progress, with annual traffic fatalities dropping by 12%, referring to the WHO. This is a testament to the hard work and dedication of countless stakeholders. But we are not moving fast enough on either sustainable transport or in road safety. Annually, there are still 1.2 million road traffic fatalities. 1 billion people live at least 2 kilometers away from a good road, and transport infrastructure is not ready to face the increasingly extreme weather of climate change. The impact is unequal. Low and middle income countries bear over 90% of road fatalities. Rural areas too often lag behind urban counterparts in safety and accessibility, widening socioeconomic divides. Vulnerable road users, pedestrians, cyclists and motorcyclists comprise over half of all road traffic deaths, underlining the urgent need for targeted interventions. As such, the upcoming UN Decade of Sustainable Transport is key to mobilizing member states towards the 2030 Paris Climate Agreement, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and supporting the actions of the second decade of action for road safety. We must never lose sight of the fact that more sustainable transport systems are, by their very nature, safer transport systems. And safer transport is more sustainable. As we prepare for this new decade in 2026, I propose 3 key approaches to guide our efforts. 1. Reduce car dependency by expanding public and multimodal transport systems, which improve health, cut emissions, reduce traffic, and enhance safety. 2. Share best practices and promote regional cooperation, such as UNEP's Pan-African Action Plan for Active Mobility, encouraging walking and cycling. 3. Invest in rural transport and connectivity to reduce poverty, ensure food security, and boost climate resilience by connecting rural and urban areas. Safe and sustainable transport is within our reach, but smart decade can foster these partnerships. Let's use this World Sustainable Transport Day to strengthen connections and partnerships for achieving the SDGs. Thank you for helping make transport safer and more sustainable.
We are very grateful to the Special Envoy for sharing this message with us today, and most especially the recommended 3 approaches that he just mentioned. Let me now, we are moving forward on our session, and it is my pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Asha De Souza. She's Team Leader for Sustainable Development and Financing for Development at the Office of the President of the General Assembly. Ms. De Souza, we are eager to hear more about the upcoming high-level meeting on sustainable transport, and please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Nayara, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to colleagues from around the world. I saw some stakeholders logged in from London, Singapore, Uganda, South Africa, and Nepal. So welcome to all of you, and certainly happy World Sustainable Transport Day on behalf of the President of the General Assembly. Allow me, of course, to thank my colleagues from DESA for the opportunity to engage on the high-level meeting on sustainable transport that was convened by the President of the General Assembly in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 77/286. Now, that meeting was aimed at highlighting sustainable and effective solutions to improve sustainable transport systems and their potential in accelerating the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Colleagues, at that meeting, the member states and stakeholders acknowledged the importance of promoting sustainable transport through enhancing intermodal transport connectivity, developing socially inclusive transport infrastructure, and of course, other aspects of transport sustainability. And let me highlight for you four key messages that were conveyed. One, the need to improve access to multimodal and intermodal transfer systems, making transport a solution for equity, sustainability, and climate change. Two, a sustainable and interconnected transport network is critical for ensuring food security and stability of supply chains, as well as promoting economic growth and development. And of course, last but not least, it is essential to prioritize safety in transport policies. And in this respect, the global plan for the decade of action for road safety should be fully implemented. And colleagues, in addition to those key messages that were identified, I wanted to highlight just a few key transformation measures that were promoted. I'll run through very quickly. Firstly, maximizing accessibility and minimizing environmental impact. Two, connecting rural and urban communities, prioritizing public transport and shaping transport behavior, promoting efficient transport systems, including within the context of coherent industry and trade policies, certainly towards circular economies, and finally investing in the resilience of transport infrastructure. Now, the UN Decade for Sustainable Development, as proclaimed by the General Assembly Resolution 78/148, presents a critical opportunity for advancing action on sustainable transport. Most prominently, it offers the opportunity to address people's needs and their access to opportunities, services, and goods, and thereby advancing economic and social development with minimal environmental impact everywhere. As an outcome of the high-level meeting held during the first ever United Nations General Assembly Week, Sustainability Week in April, the PGA submitted a series of action-oriented points towards DESA's implementation plan, the subject of our discussion today. And allow me at this juncture to highlight some of these key points which the decade must address. Firstly, as presented by the President, the decade must ensure equal access to sustainable transportation for the most vulnerable while prioritizing safety. The decade must build actions to enhance capacity building, particularly for low and middle income countries, and to highlight the special challenges and the needs of LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS while maximizing synergies with the relevant programs of action. Uh, of course, the decade must promote or build actions to promote more public and private innovative investment and in transport and mobility systems, and ensure that we engage with all relevant stakeholders in that regard. The decade must leverage the power of science and technology to accelerate modal shifts and to accelerate our green transition in the transport sector. And of course, finally, last but certainly not the least, the decade must further strengthen international cooperation, including developing international and regional transport and transit corridors, and provide opportunities for us to share best practices on implementing national and regional transport strategies and programs. colleagues, rest assured that you have a partner in the PGA and his team, including me, certainly. And we look forward to further supporting you, DESA, and supporting all stakeholders in the implementation of the decade. Thank you, Astra, and of course, thank you, Nayara. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Asha, for sharing the key messages and recommendations from the high-level meeting on sustainable transport, as well as the action-oriented points from the PGA for the implementation plan of the decade. I also take this opportunity to thank you for all the support and collaboration in so many other fronts that we share together. We are going to move to the next part of our webinar, and I want to invite again Ms. Astra Bonini for a brief overview of the process related to the preparation of the implementation plan for the UN Decade of Sustainable Development. Astra, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nayara, and really thank you to our speakers for setting the stage about the importance of sustainable transport and also some of the key initiatives and challenges the world is facing that sustainable transport can help to address. Following their stage-setting remarks, allow me to just give an overview of the background of the UN Decade and the associated activities that are taking place to lead up to the decade and to inform the implementation plan. To start with, we might just step back and consider the nature of the call for the UN Decade. As was mentioned, it was declared by the UN General Assembly in 2023 in a resolution A78-148. And the resolution notes that the decade shall commence in 2026, but it does not otherwise include detailed guidance on what the decade should achieve or what substantive and technical issues might be addressed during the decade. This is something that we are in the process of doing. We're engaging with all of you to help to understand what the key issues are and what can be addressed during the decade. The same resolution also invites the Secretary General of the UN to consider convening a third UN conference on sustainable transport, and it calls for further coordination among the UN system and other international organizations, relevant financial institutions, multilateral and bilateral donors, and the private sector. In this, it is really clear that transport is a multi-sector, multi-stakeholder issue, and with potential sustainability impacts in many different areas. And the decade is really an opportunity for us to think in those terms, those broad perspectives on sustainable transport. The resolution also builds on the earlier resolution that proclaimed the 26th of November as the World Sustainable Transport Day. Next slide, please. The decade, of course, is not taking place in a vacuum, and here at DESA, we are very eager to see how it fits into our overall SDG implementation. And this is kind of stepping back to see, as we look toward the decade, where are we in the context of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and overall sustainable development. And once we have this understanding, it becomes easier to leverage sustainable transport to try to shift course in some of these key areas where we are falling off track on the SDGs. I think many of you are aware that the last SDG progress report indicated that only 17% of the SDG targets that do have data are on track to be achieved by 2030. Over a third of them have stalled or regressed below the 2015 baseline. So it really is the time to look for, opportunities to scale up and really transform the systems that drive our economic, social, and environmental patterns. If we do not make these changes, and if we don't leverage the sustainable transport decade, by 2030, the estimates are that 590 million people may still be living in extreme poverty under current trends. Hunger is increasing. The issues of food security and transport become very clear in terms of addressing hunger issues. Approximately 1.1 billion people live in slums, and 2 billion more are expected in the next 30 years. So the accessibility and sustainability of transport systems in urban areas that are growing quickly become so much more crucial. And of course, the Paris Agreement is off track. 2023 was the warmest year on record. carbon dioxide levels continue to rise, and there's a huge opportunity in the transport sector to help to address these trends and turn things around. Next slide, please. So in order to make the most of the strong potential for transport to contribute toward these broader sustainable development issues, the General Assembly declared the decade to begin in 2026. They also requested our Department of Economic and Social Affairs to prepare an implementation plan, a strategy, so that we can make the most of the UN decade. The General Assembly requested that we do this in collaboration with the regional commissions and in consultation with member states, the UN system, intergovernmental organizations, and all relevant stakeholders. This approach will really allow us to ensure that diverse voices and experiences contribute to the plan, since transport cuts across so many different areas. It's also important to note that the implementation plan is a global policy document prepared by the UN. It's not a negotiated intergovernmental outcome. So it takes a little bit of a different approach than preparations for some of the events. The global plan for the decade of action for road safety is a similar document for those who are familiar with that process and might want to look at a process that has already taken place and the shape that this took. The General Assembly also specifically noted that this work should be done within available resources. So we do not have dedicated funding currently for this work, but we are making the most of platforms like this and webinars to really ensure that we do have the ability to reach out to as many stakeholders as possible and make this a very inclusive and comprehensive process. Next slide, please. Even within these constraints, you can see from this timeline, and with the great support of a very active transport community, we've already been able to do a lot of awareness raising and consultations to make this a truly inclusive process. The timeline shows some of the activities that have already taken place and some that are upcoming. And I won't go into details on all of these. The timeline will be on the Sustainable Transport Implementation Plan website. But I just want to highlight some of the key work streams. First, we've already initiated discussions with the member states. The high-level meeting that Asha referred to on sustainable transport that was convened last April by the President of the General Assembly really provided a good starting point in terms of looking at some of the key substantive issues. In addition, we held a dedicated informal consultation here at the UN headquarters on the 1st of October, where we invited the full membership of the UN to come and have discussions about the implementation plan. For non-governmental stakeholders, we've launched the online consultation a few weeks ago, and it will be open until mid-January. So we urge you to submit your proposals, recommendations, examples to us by then. We really do want to hear from you. And of course, we look forward to hearing all of your ideas today as well. We've also been coordinating closely with our UN colleagues across the system, and many entities are contributing to the work, including to events such as the ones that we held in COP29 in Baku. Our next collaboration will be through the UN Road Safety Retreat that's coming up in December, where we will discuss how road safety aspects can be included in the implementation plan and to really ensure coherence between the two decades. And then we are reaching out to numerous other partners, such as the World Bank, other multilateral development banks, the OECD, and more, to ensure that we really engage them in the process, understanding that transport infrastructure is an area of major investments, and we really need to have the financial sector involved in these conversations. We hope that this global track will contribute toward the implementation plan, but it's also being complemented by regional consultations that are led by all 5 regional commissions of the UN, with the first conversations already having taken place in the Asia-Pacific region, and the next consultations commencing as we speak in Africa and Western Asia. And they will then feed into the global process. And we'll make sure that the results of these consultations are posted on our website so that you can follow those closely. As you can see, we really do want to make this an inclusive process, and we look forward to working with you and launching the implementation plan by the end of next year. Just one more slide, please, to close. And this is really about raising some ideas of what the UN Decade can achieve through this process. And we've already heard a little bit about this. But from our perspective, the UN Decade is an opportunity to contribute to broader sustainable development commitments, really in multiple ways, including to provide a shared vision and a call to action for sustainable transport, but also to raise awareness about transport's importance for the overall SDG implementation. Sometimes certain really important areas can be a little bit hidden behind others, and we want to bring sustainable transport front and center so that it's clear how important it is for the SDGs. To foster and initiate new projects, initiatives, and partnerships. We look forward to working with all of you to enhance coordination in the area of transport within the UN, but also across the transport sector, and that cuts across all modes of transport. And to help us sustain and hopefully to increase political momentum for action. Ultimately, a plan is great, but we need to be taking action, and we really look forward to helping to ensure that the implementation plan follows through into the decade and generates and mobilizes a lot of action and attention. These are just a few of the things, of course, that we hope that we can achieve together during the UN Decade, but we really look forward to hearing your ideas and inputs about what the focus should be and what we should set as our shared objectives for this UN Decade. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Asra, for sharing all this background information and including the timeline and what the decade of sustainable transport is expected to achieve. Colleagues, as I mentioned in the very beginning, all this information will be uploaded to the website, to this event's website, and also the sustainable transport, the page for the decade as well. So you will have access to that very soon. So now it's time for our panel on stakeholder inputs to the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport. And as we stand at the start of this journey, with the decade set to launch in 2026, it's essential to amplify stakeholder voices early in the process and provide them with this platform. We have a very engaging panel ahead. And what I will kindly ask our panelists is if they can keep their interventions to 4 to 5 minutes, so we can also check if there are any specific questions for you coming from the audience. If you are attending and if you have questions for one of our speakers, please make sure that you indicate that in the Q&A box. So let me begin by welcoming our first speaker, Ms. Marusha Kardama, Secretary General of SLOCAT. Marusha, it's good to see you again. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nayara, and thanks to all colleagues. And kudos to DESA for bringing us together on this important day to look forward already and make sure that these World Days are allowing us as well to set the longer term transformations. Colleagues from SLOCAT, our premise is rather clear, is that accelerating the transformation of transport systems and services is amongst the most impactful steps that the global community can take to transform our societies and our economies and make sure that they remain resilient, equitable, prosperous, and all that within a warming that is not above 1.5 Celsius degrees. So for us, the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport is a unique chance to turbocharge both ambition and action for this type of transformation. It's not just paperwork. It's a decade that can serve as a blueprint to drive meaningful change and set, hopefully, the stage for broader transformations after 2035. So we envisage the decade as one that brings together governments, companies, investors, customers, and communities to reshape transport systems and give equal opportunities to everyone. Over the past months, we've been looking a bit jointly with our partners and how can the implementation plan enhance, that action. And for us, it's all very much about having a clear idea of what the impact we want the decade to have. And we've come up with several building blocks for impact. They are just building blocks. They can, of course, be, narrowed down in less. But for us, the first one is about making sure that we engage all United Nations member states across diverse geographies and priorities. Here is a moment to commend the effort that the regional commissions are already putting in those consultations with member states. The second impact we would like to see is the decade issuing a call to action that rallies broad multi-stakeholder support and that sets a pathway, a clear pathway and vision for transport transformation connected to the wider development and sustainability goals. For us, the third impact is about using the decade to lock in both multilateral and multi-stakeholder cooperation to enhance policies at the national and at the subnational level. The fourth impact for us would be to lever more and better public and private investment, particularly in low and middle income countries. The fifth impact we would like to see is the decade to help us generate reliable open data. We know that we have prevalent gaps that prevent evidence-based policymaking and investment, and that also prevent us from having an effective monitoring of the progress in the transformation of transport systems. The sixth impact we would like to see is that involvement of all stakeholders from the transport sector, but not only transport sector stakeholders in their silo, but connecting transport to other sectors that are essential to the transformation of transport. Here I'm referring to health, to energy, to land. And last but not least, of course, for us, the decade is an opportunity to enhance UN interagency coordination and ministerial engagement on sustainable transport, as we had the opportunity to enjoy during the United Nations General Assembly Sustainability Week that was mentioned a few moments ago. So with that in mind, we have been looking a bit at how we can organize the work over the decade. Of course, one could look into different modes and subsectors of transport, but one could also look at large, broad encompassing focus areas that would allow for specificity at the regional level, would allow to be looked at through cross-cutting lenses or through different transport modes. And that would also give the opportunity for different multi-stakeholder initiatives to be curated over the decade. So I'm going to give you the 6 focus areas, broad encompassing areas that we came up with. But again, this is just an example of how we could avoid using the decade to just look at a specific modal approach. So a first area could be looking at transport for prosperous, low carbon and resilient communities. And of course, we would be looking here at multimodality, about shifting to modes of transport that are less, say, polluting, and about giving access, as we could be looking as well to resilience. The second area for us could be the right to safe, affordable and clear mobility, which allows us to connect with the road safety agenda, but also with the air pollution agenda. A third area could be transport and energy transformation, which would allow us to look at the imperative of leaving fossil fuels behind in the transport sector. A fourth one could be decent jobs and livelihoods in the low carbon economy. We know that there's a just transition that needs to happen in the sector. A fifth area could be the economics and finance for transport transformations. We know that oftentimes economics, fiscality regimes, pricing are not really working in favor of transport transformation. And of course, fossil fuel subsidies in transport are still a key issue to overcome. And last but not least, a broad encompassing focus area could be that one of capacity building for robust policy making and investment. Last, if you allow me, very quickly, a word of what is it that our organization, our partnerships LOCAT could be contributing. So over the next months, we are, of course, here to continue facilitating multi-stakeholder engagement and a bit of thought leadership, as we've been doing over the past months. But I think that during the decade, there's 3 things that we could particularly contribute. First, we could lever our network to make sure that, again, this is not an agenda just for transport as much as we need it, but one that connects transport with broader development goals and with other sectors. Second, we could be here to curate and facilitate multi-stakeholder initiatives. And last but not least, we are here as well to support our global efforts in tracking what's going on, what is the progress, and producing knowledge products. For instance, our Transport, Climate and Sustainability Global Status Report that comes every 2 years is a tool that we would put at the service of the implementation of the decade. So thank you very much again. I'm going to drop in the chat box a link to where you can find a bit more in detail all these thoughts that we've been putting together. But kudos again for DESA to connecting us today, and happy World Sustainable Transport Day. Thanks, Nayara. Back to you.
Thank you so very much, Marusha, for very concrete, action-oriented and inspiring inputs that you are bringing today. Please, if you could also share those, if you have those, like the notes, etc., with my colleagues, so we can make sure that we capture them properly in the summary of those discussions. And this also goes for all our speakers today. Please, if you have notes, share with us in the Secretariat, and we will be considering them for the summary. Let me now invite Mr. Mohammed Ali Lotuf Director for Capacity Building and Advocacy at the G3ICT, the Global Initiative for Inclusive ICTs.
Thank you, Naira. Thank you very much for having us joining this amazing and very exciting initiative. Many congratulations to the United Nations and its relevant divisions on the launching of the Decade on Sustainable Transportation. This is a very key factor in enhancing sustainable development, especially when we look at the issue of sustainable transportation from the human centric point of view. What I mean here is when we address issues of transportation, of course, I cannot agree more with my colleague who just spoke about the environmental and developmental impact of sustainable transportation in relevance to many sectors, education, employment, healthcare, and previous colleagues spoke about food security and rural development. It's very important, but when I think the impact of such initiative has to also take into consideration the needs of marginalized groups. I'm here particularly referring to persons with disabilities and elderly people. When we address this point, we are not only talking about the issue of the point of accessing like buses or cars or bus stations and train stations. It's beyond that. We see in many cities, many countries that there is like great openness towards adopting policies and plans for making cities inclusive or accessible, particularly from a transportation, from as far as transportation sector is concerned. But we also want to see that the impact of this new initiative takes into consideration universal design. And I'm here referring particularly to the universal approach to planning of sustainable transportation. And when we talk about universal design of sustainable transportation, means that we need to take into account all needs of all marginalized groups at the same time. And a key success to ensure the success of this approach is to make sure that we engage marginalized groups from the beginning in the planning process towards achieving sustainable transportation. And I think we have plenty of space and time. I know, like there's no enough time anywhere, but at least we can start thinking strategically together of how we can engage marginalized groups, persons with disabilities, elderly people, and their organizations or representative organizations in the planning process of such towards achieving sustainable transportation. And here we can address issues of when we bring these organizations or these marginalized groups in the picture, we can talk about how we can ensure that there is sustainable procurement of transportation system. We can talk about how we can budget from the beginning for transportation, for sustainable transportation, sustainable and inclusive transportation system. Our organization has launched 5-6+ years ago something called the Launchpad initiative, which engages or is concerned with issues of public procurement for inclusivity and accessibility, particularly when it comes to smart cities. But and I'm very happy that the resolution 78/148 of last year, 2023, by the United Nations General Assembly has addressed issues of persons with disabilities and elderly people. At the same time, also took into consideration issues of digitization of public transportation, kiosks and public and train stations, also information about road safety, making sure that these are available electronically. That's very important, but how we can make sure that this kind of digitization takes into consideration standards of accessibility. ISO and the WCAG and other standard organizations have put together a lot of standards that are concerned with ensuring the accessibility of information. And this covers also websites related to transportation services in cities and countries. And there is a lot of things that we can offer to help raising awareness of governments and other relevant stakeholders about the issue of digitization and accessibility of public transportation sector, and also making sure that policymakers and also people who are involved in the process of the development of transportation sector will receive training on how to make sure that this this initiative towards sustainable transportation is can be possibly implemented. And we have experts nowadays through our association of accessibility professionals around the world. We have like experts in around 40 countries plus who can help in offering the consultation that governments need, and the United Nations agencies in charge of this initiative need to make sure that this initiative on sustainable transportation is inclusive. We have to remember that the United Nations 18 years ago has adopted the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and accessibility of transportation is a key right that is recognized through this convention. It's particularly in Article 9 of the convention. And I think, I mean, the United Nations should be, and it is the key leading organization on promoting rights of persons with disabilities. And now we are talking about the treaty on the rights of elderly people that's in the process of negotiation. I think this will open up a lot of dialogue and discussion around how to make sure public transportation sector inclusive by all means for persons with disabilities and elderly people.
Mohammed,
and I will share the websites to our organization, and we are more than happy to continue the dialogue and the discussion about how we can contribute to this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mohammed, for your inputs and this the vision of the importance of bringing the human perspective for this discussion and planning sustainable transport with the stakeholders, especially those that are more vulnerable or that have specific needs. Thank you so much. Let me invite now Ms. Claire Hart, Vice President for International Affairs and European Cooperation. She's Municipal Councillor for International Relations in Montpellier in France. Please, Ms. Hart, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with you here today. And I just have to say, before beginning, I'm in a railway station. So if you hear any strange noise in the background, it's very much linked to the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport. So distinguished participants, dear friends in the world of international relations and transport, I'm also speaking to you today as a councillor, as a city councillor, but also on behalf of United Cities and Local Governments. And I'm going to be banging the drum for the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport to link up with the world of local and regional governments, because we have so much to do together. And we believe very strongly and very deeply that we must address public transport just not only as mobility, as a way to get from A to Z, but also as community empowerment, as a way of advancing the SDGs, and also a way of rethinking development paradigms in order to align them with principles of care, solidarity, and sustainability, which really are at the heart of everything we do in our cities. In short, we believe that we must reinvent transport systems to serve the needs of all people, and particularly vulnerable and marginalized groups, as has just been said, while contributing to climate resilience and social inclusion. So we see this UN Decade of Sustainable Transport as a real opportunity, a strong opportunity to strengthen and build cooperation between the UN and the UN system and local and regional governments. And we believe that effective multi-level governance is going to be key to delivering sustainable mobility solutions. But in order to achieve all of this, which is a wonderful goal, we must also create structures for continuous engagement. And we believe that our local and regional governments are the closest to the local communities, and so as such must be included as active participants in shaping and implementing the decade's goals. A holistic approach that links the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport to all the other key processes, such as implementation of the Pact of the Future, we believe is absolutely crucial to ensuring transformative impact and real transformative change. So we advocate for the formal recognition of local and regional level governments as key partners in all of these processes. You have to see us, if I might say this, as not just implementers, but co-creators of global solutions, and particularly in areas such as sustainable transport, mobility, and urban resilience. To realize the ambitions of the decade, we fully support the International Association of Public Transport's new template, which calls for a range of public transport policies and measures, which will outline specific commitments, finance, and ambitious mode shift targets towards low and zero emission public transport. And this is something that we work on every single day in our local communities. We're pushing bicycles, we're trying to get people out of cars, and we're working to improve our public transport solutions. So in short, we have to be transformative. We have to strengthen technical and national and institutional capacities in order to ensure that the national determined contributions are not just delivered, but are more ambitious than they were in the past. We have to measure key performance indicators as well, both linked to emissions reductions and to a number of other social factors in order to build a link between SDGs and policy interventions to be sure that they have the desired effect and are measurable. And we believe that public transport and active mobility are much more than just tools for reducing emissions. They're also pathways to achieving broader goals of equity, inclusion, and sustainability. We believe that by enhancing connectivity, reducing congestion, and promoting healthier lifestyles, sustainable transport systems directly contribute to localizing the SDGs and ensuring alignment with the global goals in the Paris Agreement. So we advocate for bringing cities closer to people and creating closer connections between residents and institutions, encouraging civic engagement and solidarity, and reducing the distances between social groups and central and peripheral neighborhoods is going to be at the heart of this process. Highly connected cities or territories with streets that encourage walking and cycling, well-distributed, low-carbon and public transport, which is affordable for all. And that brings me back to our most vulnerable populations, is absolutely key. And all those proximity models, such as the 15-minute city, or the work advanced within the Global Observatory of Sustainable Proximities, led by the UCLG, Sorbonne University, and UN Habitat, are going to be at the heart of this effort and really will be central to the achievement of the decade's goals. Why? Because they represent holistic approaches.
Sorry, Ms.
Yeah, I'm just on my final paragraph.
Thank you.
And I just want to say that you can count on us. Local government organizations are there. We're ready to act. We're ready to stand as a unifying force, ensuring cross-sectoral implementation. And you can really count on us. So thank you, one and all, and happy Sustainable Transport Day to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Hart, for joining us today and this call for local governments to be considered as co-creators of solutions, but also they usually are the ones who spearhead good solutions that then we are scaled up broadly. Let me now invite Mr. Habib Turki, Chief Development Officer at the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, FIA. Please, Mr. Turki, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nayara, and happy day to all. So we are really delighted to be here with you, and we are extremely honored by the invitation, especially as the FIA is wholeheartedly supporting the UN Decade for Sustainable Transport. So I would imagine that in the audience, many people are not necessarily familiar with who the FIA is, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile. We are the international organization that actually governs motorsport globally. And this includes rally, karting, but also Formula E and Formula One. By the way, the season is coming to an end. And you can view actually motorsport as some sort of giant lab where we test and where we develop the technologies and the modes of transport of tomorrow. So in this framework, or in the framework of motorsport, we develop technologies that are saving lives and that are preserving the environment on the one hand, and on the other hand, that we're trying to work on the performance itself, right? So we want to have the most performant vehicles to drive our economy forward, and at the same time have the cleanest and safest modes of transport for all. So the FIA, we are a global federation. We represent 243 member clubs around the world and approximately 80 million road users, especially in Europe. And therefore, we are uniquely positioned to advocate for sustainable transport policies and inspire behavioral change, right? So basically, this is who we are. A little bit earlier, Mr. Mariasin has been talking about the conventions actually that the UNECE is governing, and the FIA is working closely with the UN, and we are actively contributing to the Inland Transport Committee and its various working groups. And these collaborations focus on harmonizing international road safety and sustainable standards, fostering regulatory innovation, and ensuring that a coherent global framework for sustainable mobility is there, right? So these are our main areas of action, I would say. Now, the implementation plan that we are talking about today can enhance multi-stakeholder collaboration across the UN system, member states, and other stakeholders. And decarbonizing transport actually requires coordinated efforts across all these actors. And the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport provides the roadmap for such collaboration. This is why we wholeheartedly support the UN Decade for Sustainable Transport. And to make the transition successful, we must nevertheless overcome some barriers, some key barriers to greener mobility, I would say. I would think that, number one would be establishing a regulatory framework that incentivizes innovation and adoption of sustainable technologies. That's number one. And number two, ensuring equitable access to clear and transport options for all users in all regions. So this is something that our current leadership has been very actively advocating for. So basically, making sure that safe and sustainable tourism is accessible to all, and we call it internally, empowering the regions, right? And the FIA now, our leadership team is committed to facilitating this conversation through our presence at the UN and various UN forums, and by collaborating with our members to ensure that policies remain user-centric and adaptable to diverse needs. So this is in general, but if you want to go more into the concrete initiatives that we have been implementing, developing, and implementing, that could contribute to the 2026-35 decade of sustainable transport, then number one would be the FIA Smart Driving Challenge, right? So it's an app, it's an application. You can download it, and you can join a team, and it is an app that is powered by AI. It helps road users measure and reduce their emissions or battery usage, promoting green journeys. And at COP29, actually, our winner achieved a 32% emission reduction, right? So this is an example of the potential impact if scaled globally, right? So basically, we have developed these solutions for not just, so here we are outside of motorsport. So this is the everyday mobility, as we call it. And we can reduce emissions by 32%, which is quite spectacular. We also work with Euro NCAP, for those of you who are familiar with who are in this part of the world. So Euro NCAP, sorry, to get a tangible data on the environmental performance of vehicles, and this helps users to make informed decisions when buying cars. At the end of the day, FIA is an organization that promotes the interest of road users. And then we have the trade of used vehicles, and more specifically, the assurance of minimal safety and sustainability requirements that has been a key priority in the past, particularly in our collaboration with UNEP. As I said a little bit earlier, we contribute to the work of the Inland Transport Committee. We raise awareness about the conventions. We raise awareness about the importance, actually, to have this multilateral approach in tackling this kind of mobility-related topics or challenges. So this is why we actively engage with mostly UNECE, but other regional economic commissions on sustainable fuels, for example, and vehicle safety and connected mobility, and so on and so forth. As I said, motorsport, if you want, can continue to drive innovation in energy efficiency, in sustainable technologies. So technologies that are developed on the track, such as advancements in EV batteries and hydrogen propulsions, are already being deployed in everyday vehicles. So these innovations highlight how motorsport serves as a global laboratory for the sustainability transition. I often take an example of two examples, actually, that illustrates this. Number one is during the 2022 Formula One season, there was a spectacular accident that happened in Bahrain. It was Romain Grosjean who crashed his vehicle into a wall, and for like more than 30 seconds, he was literally in fire. He was like stuck there, and he just stood up at some point and walked out. He was safe and sound. So this is thanks to the technologies that we have developed. And if these technologies can work in the framework of Formula One, right, for vehicles that are going at 300 kilometers per hour, most likely it will work for me if I'm driving in the city center of Geneva, 30 kilometers per hour. So this is just a caricature, of course, but I guess you get the idea. So
yeah. Sorry, Mr. Turkey, if you could wrap up. Sorry.
I was wrapping up.
Thank you.
The second example is to illustrate that FIA is also contributing to the transportation of goods. So it's not just passengers. We have the European Truck Championship that was the first to adopt sustainable fuels at 100%, and this has reduced the CO2 emissions by 90%. So the FIA, we are proud to collaborate with member states, with the UN system, and other stakeholders to drive the systematic changes needed for sustainable transport. And together, we can ensure that sustainable transport is not just a goal for the future, but a reality for today's global citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Turkey, for bringing FIA's perspectives and interesting this idea of the transport of tomorrow that also has the user at the center. Thank you so very much, and apologies that I had to intervene. Next, we have our last speaker of this panel discussion, and I'm going to invite her in a second. Just want to remind colleagues, if you have questions or comments, please use the Q&A box. We are going to try to address a few of those as we after our final intervention. So let me invite Ms. Maria Lemon, GHD's infrastructure market leader for the United States. Please, Ms. Lemon, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for including me in this important conversation. Personally, I'm committed to sustainability for my entire lifetime, and it will color some of my comments. From working towards local recycling in the early 70s, building a passive solar home that we still live in the 80s, enabling projects to be more sustainable using FITIC standards in the US in the 90s, enabling projects to be using the Envision tool in the 2000s, serving on Harvard Sustainable Infrastructure Advisory Board in the 2010s, and then capping with the finalization of ASCE standard practice for sustainable infrastructure last year, ASCE 7323, while I was worldwide president for the American Society of Civil Engineers. This experience informs my work as vice chair for the President's National Infrastructure Advisory Council on how we move forward with some of these things. Because of the geopolitics of infrastructure, it's critical to focus not only on the human health and environmental benefits of sustainability, but also the business case. And that requires a system of systems thinking, as the weak link is what causes a system to fail. Transport is the connective tissue for all other forms of infrastructure. So since I'm the closing panelist, I'd like to zoom out in my observations, agreeing with everything that's been said to date, but basically to kind of zoom out. ASCE is a worldwide leader in civil engineering publications and standards. Our ASCE 722 is the standard for habitable buildings approved by the International Code Council worldwide. We have over 70 published standards, over 75 standing committees that do standards, and they encompass 2,700 subject matter experts from around the world. 7323 follows the following topics: general, sustainable leadership, quality of life, resource allocation, natural world, greenhouse gas emissions, resilience, and life cycle cost analysis. ASCE's past president, who's with us here too, Guna, had a strong role in advancing that standard as well. My company, GHD, recently published a sustainability report where we share our efforts and progress towards achieving the UN Sustainability Development Goals. Those goals are the heart of our strategy. We have a clear stated vision: water, energy, and urbanization made sustainable for generations to come. All 13,000 of our employees worldwide believe and bring that to our clients. We're helping our clients meet their sustainability goals while also reducing our own operations' impact on the environment and the communities we connect with. We're committed to focus on 5 areas. And again, I think this really wraps up what we've been talking about. First, performance. Our performance metrics reflect our focus on clients, safety, and business outcomes as we help our clients and communities solve some of the world's biggest challenges. Sustainability, unlocking a more equitable, resilient, and prosperous future for all, is at the core of our purpose and vision. Our work drives innovation and positive change for our clients and communities worldwide. Third, the future of water. We employ a holistic lens grounded in responsible water stewardship to realize efficiencies and innovation across client project life cycles. In 2022, we released a report on aquanomics, the economics of water risk and future resilience. Future energy, our 4th pillar. Our projects have helped businesses tackle the energy transition and net zero challenges while creating sustainable, reliable, and affordable energy systems. In 2023, we released a report called Shocked, which is de-risking the energy transition in an era of profound uncertainty. And 5th, future communities. We believe communities are at their best when they are connected, resilient, productive, and inspired. This year, we released the report Crossroads, Choosing the Path to Positive Legacy, with communities facing compound pressures, change, complexity, and uncertainty. Charting a course to an equitable future has never been more challenging. At this critical juncture, how do we promote fair and fit-for-purpose infrastructure from one generation to the next? It's time to do things differently, time to embrace diversity of thought and look confidently into the future. Time to choose the path that leads to a positive legacy. These reports, both GHD and ASCE, show a path forward. ASCE standards defined what the minimum standards should be. Together, it sheds light on the business case for a sustainable and resilient path forward. To date, ASCE has received the endorsement for ASCE 7323 from the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, the Asian Coordinating Council of Civil Engineering, and the Pan American Union of Engineering Associations as the worldwide standard. I urge the UN to adopt ASCE 7323 as the standard to move forward for a sustainable future for all integrated infrastructure. Thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Lemon, for your inputs and also for those very concrete, action-oriented, and the good practices that you just shared with us. We really appreciate your contribution. Colleagues, we are running out of time, but I hope we can at least address one or two of the questions that I see on the Q&A. You can outvote questions, so please indicate the ones that you want to see as the panel, and also I'll be inviting my colleague Astra to address some of those. We will also be taking note of those questions as part of the process of developing the implementation plan for the decade. Let me just go to the Q&A. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to read 2 of those questions, and then I'm going to invite our panel. I'll give like 30 seconds each for a key reflection or a key message on each of those, or if you want to address those questions. And then we are going to start wrapping up. So if you indulge us, we might need a few more minutes for the webinar. We have a question that from Anna Mari. She is mentioning that there is that in setting sustainable transport modes, it's important to consider also animals and how in rural areas those are the backbone of food security and also of transportation. And then a question is, how can we ensure that the solutions consider consider those animals and their well-being? And this is one question. And the second question that I have is how to empower the participation of civil society in the strategy and decision-making for transportation transformation and implementation effectively. So I'll flag those 2 questions. My colleagues are also checking if there are specific questions that we can address more with more concrete answers. And let me just go back. I'll give 30 seconds to each of our panelists. I'll start with Marusha. And Marusha, do you have any short key reflections?
30 seconds, that's quite a challenge, and I doubt I will meet it this time. I'm trying to meet my initial challenge of 4 to 5 minutes, but I've been scanning through the questions, and I guess I got the privilege of not being chairing the talks like you, Nayara, so I could read a bit through what's going on in the chat box. And I would like to remind us about the power of public transport, walking and cycling, particularly when we combine it in integrated manners. It's about access. Equitable access to jobs, to healthcare, to education, because that is what transport is about. And it's also, if we combine those 3 modes in our cities, we can reduce in 50% the GHG emissions for transport in urban environments. But access is also about making sure that we overcome that currently half of the world's population is lacking either access to all weather roads or access to public transport. I would also like to have a word about finance in general, pricing, fiscality, because I've seen some comments about fossil fuel subsidies there. And of course, that is a key aspect, but fundamentally it's about getting the pricing right, acknowledging that not all modes cost the same to the environment and to our societies. And a final word about economic appraisals. There is a question in somewhere in the chat or in the Q&A box about how do we ensure that the money goes to the right place without biased decisions. Well, it's very much about interrogating what is value for money when we decide where we put the investment in transport infrastructure, systems and services. And if we continue measuring transport with priorities that are just about moving from A to B, whether it's goods or people, we are really going to miss out on the opportunity for making sure that the way in which we appraise the worthiness of an economic investment is also looking at sustainability, from accessibility to health impacts, to energy transformation, to job creation, to economic development. That is what the economic appraisals for investments in transport need to be looking at. Sorry that I didn't make the 30-second challenge.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Nayara.
Marusha. I know this is a big challenge I asked. Mohammed, your 30 seconds final thoughts?
All right. Well, I already mentioned in my presentation that engaging civil society organizations, particularly organizations representing marginalized groups in decision making and in dialogue with policymakers and with developers of sustainable transport systems on local and national level, also benefiting from best practices from different countries and initiatives, also taking advantage of resources that civil society organizations is making available for the development of sustainable transportation systems is a key strategy. One thing I want to end with is that policymakers tend to raise concerns always when they start planning for something, like afraid that their planning would not meet needs of all people because it's costly, which is actually not true. Inclusivity is from a cost benefit point of view has much added value and positive impact on macroeconomy, because once we make sure that all people benefit from sustainable transportation systems, we are also making sure that children can go to schools, people can go to work, persons with disabilities can access all spheres of life in society, and this can contribute better to the economy of our countries. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mohammed. Ms. Claire Hart, I don't know if your train has come or if you're still with us for some 30-second final message.
Yeah, just very, very quickly, just before leaping in this wonderful train. I think I would sum it up by saying that we have to work with every member of civil society as closely as possible with the local community. And when we talk about taking into account the most fragile members of society, we maybe could include the animal life, plant life in that. And when we make new projects in our cities, we work always with organizations, NGOs that represent the animal world, represent the plant, the flora and fauna in our cities. Obviously, it's absolutely essential. We must protect biodiversity in everything we do. And when we get people out of cars, put them onto bikes, put them into public transport, that's what we're doing. But I think I would sum it up by saying we cannot anymore advance on new projects without working hand in hand with civil society.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Hart. Mr. Turkey, your final message, please.
Thank you very much. So today's discussion, I guess, underscores the vital role of transport, connecting people, trade, and tourism. I saw that there was a question on tourism in the chat box, while supporting sustainable development. And we believe at the FIA that multilateralism, as championed by the United Nations, is key to addressing the complex challenges in this sector. And through global cooperation and shared commitment, we can integrate innovative solutions, foster economic growth, and ensure inclusivities. And the UN's leadership in advancing the decade of sustainable transport provides a critical framework to align our efforts with the SDGs and build sustainable, interconnected future for all. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Turkey. Ms. Maria Lemon, your final message, please.
Yeah. Quick wrap. I mentioned system of systems, and I can give you a great quick example of how this works, specifically with transport and other areas. So in Los Angeles County, the Public Works director there, Mark Pastrella, probably about 8 years back, noticed that some of the most under-resourced communities had some of the highest incidence of diabetes, and that and at the county they service those individuals, and those are underwritten and expense to the county. They also were areas that didn't have sidewalks, and when he put sidewalks into those communities, because people couldn't walk to anything, when he put sidewalks in the communities, he had a huge cost benefit because those cases of diabetes went way down. So think about the system and how we improve in one area to help pay the greenium that we're seeing in some of the things that we have to do in sustainable transport. I think the financial industry is very willing to hear this because it's about that whole bottom line and not just the sliver. Thanks.
Thank you so very much. Before I give the floor to Astra again, so she can also share some closing remarks and any additional message, I want to remind you that we have a global online stakeholder consultation that is now up and open for your inputs. My colleagues, they are posting the link in the chat box. And we really encourage you to provide your recommendations, suggestions, and inputs. The deadline is the 10th of January, 2025. DESA will be preparing a summary report as well. And we really encourage you to join. And we also have a mailing list that will be, my colleagues will also be sharing the details very soon. In case you are interested in following and being in touch of what is happening or planned in connection with the decade, we encourage you to sign up. It will be our main tool for communication moving forward. Let me invite Astra for some final remarks, reflections, and then if she could, please close the call. Thank you so much. Over to you, Astra.
Thank you, Nayara, and thank you to all of the participants in the chat and the Q&A box, the panelists. It's really been a full program for a short time that we're here together, but I think we have so much rich material to move forward with to inform the implementation plan. And you've all raised so many important questions that need to be considered in this process. Maybe I'll try to answer a few of the questions. My colleague Rena, who's really the focal point for UNDESA on sustainable transport, is in the chat answering some of these questions as well. But really just to say, and this has come out of the discussions, sustainable transport, yes, we're focused on mobility. We need to get people from A to B. It is contextual. So we understand that there are many different levels of development, many different modes of transport that will be part of that process. But also, I appreciate Marusha's comments. It's not just about A to B. We can do so much more to link sustainable transport to all of the pillars of sustainability. Looking at the social patterns that are shaped by our transport systems, the economic opportunities that are either there or not there, depending on the transport access that people have. And of course, it's such a huge opportunity to tackle some of our key environmental challenges working through the transport sector. So we really would like to see the decade as a space to scale up all of the actions and all of the messaging about how important sustainable transport is in all of those areas. We talked about transformation coming out of the SDG Summit in 2023. This was the key call on how we're going to achieve the SDGs. And that, of course, means transforming our transport systems and the way that we move around. And we're very eager to support all of the member states, all of the stakeholders to take those kinds of initiatives. There's the means of implementation question. This came up in the chat. There's financing, there's science, technology, and innovation, there's capacity building, there's behavior change. All of this also needs to be part of the implementation plan in order to actually bring about the types of results that we envision and the types of projects that we envision. So we very much want that to be a feature. And there was much discussion about this coming out also. And it's about planning for the future. We are headed very quickly toward 2030. We just had the Summit of the Future at the United Nations headquarters, and transport is most certainly a sector where long-term planning, large investments are being considered. And so taking into account all of these different aspects that need to be on the table including accessibility, including sustainability, including affordability. So we want to make sure that all of this is part of the discussion. We thank you very much for all of your participation. Please do send your inputs through the online consultation. We're very much looking forward to receiving these, and this will allow us to make sure that all of your expertise and the context that you are situated in is reflected in the implementation plan. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to working with all of you in the coming months and the decade ahead. Thank you very much.
The call is now adjourned. Thank you so very much, everyone, for joining.